Hey crafty people, it's Tasha here with another video tutorial for Wow Embossing Powder. Today I'm trying a non-traditional Christmassy colour scheme and I want to stretch those supplies, so I'm going to repurpose something from my crafty stash. Starting with this stencil. Now we released it as balloons, but flip it 180 degrees and watch it become baubles. Now, I'll also be using pink sapphire, dried lavender and myrrh embossing powders and silver earth sparkles, plus my Wow embossing marker. Now, I've got a sentiment from Heavy Doodle, which I have pre-cut and assembled. I've got heavyweight vellum on the bottom and then double-sided foam adhesive for the words themselves. I have a black fine liner, and then I thought that I might use a glue pen, but I didn't in the end. Now, ignore that gold sparkles there. And then I've also got some mini ink blending brushes, and for my inks I have Flirty Fuchsia, Aquatini and Pucker Up, which are all from Catherine Pootler. I'm starting by ink blending the baubles to get a base colour down. Then we can work on making them even more fabulous a little later on. I've got an A2 panel of Nina Solar White £80, which I've adhered onto the back of my stencil with some low tack tape. Now I'm going to work through colouring these in diagonal rows, just doing all of each colour before moving on to the next, because I just think that's going to be the quickest and most efficient way to get the job done. Now, I'm using some low tack tape to mask off the surrounding area, and you can reuse the tape as you shift across the panel. To give me a natural kind of shadow highlight on each bauble, I'm blending on from the right hand side for each individual bauble one at a time. Now, if you just want them to be a solid colour across the whole bauble, then you can definitely get this colouring done quicker with a larger brush or a foam blender. Now, each time I finish a row, I'm wiping away the excess ink left on the stencil before removing the masking. Then I can shift the tape over and repeat until I've got all of my purple baubles coloured. Now, I always make sure to use a clean edge of masking tape for each new colour so I don't get any contamination. You can see that for the teal, I can just use the other edge of those same tape pieces, but I do need to swap it out for some clean strips to complete my pink baubles. Now, once I've finished all of my ink blending, I can set this aside to dry really well. Now, I actually left mine overnight because I wanted to be 100% sure that there was zero moisture left in any of those baubles before I moved on to the next couple of steps. So, as if by magic, I now have a fully dried panel of roughly bauble-shaped colourful blobs. So, let's amp up the baublage, shall we? I'm starting with some simple outlines, doodling a really basic topper onto each one, and then freehanding a circle around each ornament. I'm purposely not giving myself a lot of time to overthink it and just going across the line, adding the toppers, then going back across to add all the circles. Now, when I say that I'm not giving myself a lot of time, do bear in mind that what you see here is sped up quite a bit. I can't actually go this fast, unfortunately. Now, once I have my outlines done, I'm going to start adding some patterns onto each one. Now, this bit I have planned out a teensy bit in advance, just to work out which patterns I could fit onto that smaller space. So, I've got a rough idea of what patterns I'll use, but I didn't plan out which ones would go where. So that bit is completely left up to the whims of my distracted brain as I sing along to my music. In case you're wondering, today it's a mix of One Direction, Louis Tomlinson and Harry Styles, with a little sprinkling of Ed Sheeran mixed in. Now I've got a mix of stripes, squiggles, dots, plus the odd Christmas tree thrown in for good measure. Now, if you wanted to, you could totally just leave it at that. Simple colour and pen doodle. But we all know that I've just got to make it wow. So, once I've successfully doodled on all of my baubles, I'm grabbing my wow embossing marker to add some special accents. You wouldn't usually need to use any anti-static with wow powders because we've got some uber special and super secret anti-static technology built right in, but that's not going to work on any natural oils that have transferred from my hand when I'm pouring all over the panel. So I'm going to neutralise that with some anti-static before I start working on those extra accents, one colour at a time. Now I've decided for a tone-on-tone look, choosing powders from our latest release that work well with the ink colour palette that I've got going on here. Once I've drawn over all the baubles that I want to add to, I'm laying a piece of scrap paper underneath and pouring dried lavender all over those purple baubles. Then I can tip the excess onto the scrap paper and funnel it back into the jar to be used on another project. Now, you could heat all of those before moving on to the next colour, but I want to minimise the amount of heat that I'm applying, so I decided to just really carefully continue my mark making onto the teal ornaments, being really careful not to disturb that purple powder, which could easily be dislodged. I'll cover the teal baubles with mare, which is a really nice mix of translucent teal with some chunky white opaque that's going to give some really interesting details. I had a couple of areas of straight embossing with this teal colour, so I just brushed that away with a dry brush before continuing on my mission to wow these ornaments. Last but not least, I repeated the same steps for the pink baubles, covering those with pink sapphire, which is part of the Pinktastic duo. Once I have all of the colours finished, I can then heat up the whole panel at once. Now, as always, I made sure that my heat tool was thoroughly hot before bringing it to my project. I make sure to go over the whole thing, keeping the heat source moving to avoid overheating any sections, which could cause paper warping or could cause the embossing powder to melt too much, and then it's going to sink into the panel. Okay, so that completes the baublification, and we can move on to wowing that sentiment now. I die cut the words from a sheet of double-sided adhesive foam, so it was really easy to stick it down onto that thick vellum shadow. Then I can peel up the release tape from the front and pour my silver earth sparkles all over it. Now, this is a super fine glitter. It's going to sit really well on that adhesive foam. I just want to make sure that it's pressed well into the adhesive, and then I like to give it a really good brush over the whole die cut just to dislodge any excess glitter. Okay, now we can get to assembling the card, starting with cutting a decorative panel die from my background. This gives it a nice edge detail and creates a border around once it's on a card base. Even though it's heavyweight vellum, it's not blurring the background enough for me, so I decided to rectify this by just cutting another piece from the same vellum, and then I adhered that behind to double the thickness, and that makes a massive difference. Now, when I'm adding liquid glue, I always make sure to hide it behind the glittery sentiment so it's not visible through the vellum. Now I'm popping it up on some foam adhesive tape before carefully adhering it to a US A2 sized panel. Now, whilst I know that this foam tape is more than sufficient to hold the panel in place, I do like to add some liquid adhesive as it gives me a bit more wiggle room to make sure the panel is central before it sticks fast. Okay, to tie in that doodling on my baubles with the rest of the card base, I'm adding some rough lines as a border. Now, this always used to be a go-to technique for me, but I've not actually done it a lot recently, so I'm happy to bring that back. Once that's all in place, the only thing left to do is embellish. And I've chosen these gorgeous bubble blowout iridescent clear bubbles, which manage to really pull out the colours of the ink really well. So that's my card done. I really hope you like the ideas and tips that I shared today. Tell me, will you be trying an unconventional colour scheme for some of your Christmas crafting this year? Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, just all the things. And thank you so much for spending this time with me today. Have a lovely, happy, safe and wonderful week. Stay crafty. Bye.